Next topic. So we have our first panel for the day coming up, right? Any guesses on what's our first topic? How can you manage without Slack?
I don't relate, but I think that's a little stereotypical, no?
Yeah, you're right. I think I was just thinking about it from my perspective, and he probably didn't have to use it at his previous organization and needed someone to help him personally walk him through it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, our organizations or our offices today are not, the orientation has not been given the right way, or people take more time to actually adjust to it. So,
Yeah, and true.
just needs more time.
And this is just actually a perfect example and a small aspect of how today's workspaces may not be inclusive, right? And our first session is actually going to go into this, on how inaccessible design systematically excludes people and contributes even further to inequities that already exist.
And how we must recognize the exclusions that are baked into our social and corporate systems. How we must design keeping diversity in mind and enable accessibility to all places that people work, visit, and even live in.
And how can organization policies support to destigmatize and break biases against traditionally excluded groups and communities? So to dive into how we can design inclusive workspaces and culture, we have our first panel of the day, Blueprints of Belonging.
Let us please welcome on stage Professor VASANTHI SRINIVASAN from IIMB, PRAJAKTA KANAGLEKAR, Supply Chain and HR from Flipkart, and CHUNG THAM, India Wealth and Asset Management Leader from EY Assurance.
Thank you so much. And I think as the opening panel, Satyaki could not have set a better context. And it's always been such a pleasure, and it's a matter of pride to be in Bangalore with the BIAL team. Thank you very much for making this wonderful inclusive airport. I wanted to just kind of connect from what Satyaki said into our panel discussion. Satyaki said three things which are going to be very important when we look at inclusion by design. And he kept saying, we didn't think DEI. The fact is they thought inclusive operations. Yeah? They thought of how you can help every single customer. They didn't need to think DEI. And I think one of the things about design is as natural human process, so intuitive that when I was preparing for this session, I realized that the genesis for the prosthetics that we use today is not anything new. 3,000 years old. You can actually see it in the Egyptian hieroglyphics of how they used stone and iron to be able to build limbs for individuals who'd lost a limb. So design in some sense is intuitive and natural. But I think as we were listening, I was listening to the first presentation, he kept saying how many mistakes we had done even when we went into design. And that kind of leads me to look at design as something that is deliberate, that's constructed with a vision of who we are intending to include. And I think when we are looking at this conference theme of inclusion by design, we are actually talking about a deliberately constructed process. And just to kind of set the context for this inclusion by design means that there is a designer, there is the designed for whom we are designing, and the process of design. And for all of us sitting in this room, when we say we are DEI specialists, are we looking at the designer and the designer's bias, the designed and the functionalities that we may not understand, and most importantly, the process of designing, which is collaborative, which brings together what it is that everybody needs. Can design be serendipity? Yes, for many of us, and I'm sure as we listen to my presentations today, people said it was by accident we discovered. We just did this and we found this happened. Can it happen? Of course it happens. So to that extent, what I'd like for in this panel, because we are the introductory panel, this context setting is important. So today I have with me two wonderful panelists coming from very different organizations with very different ethos, ways of working, their perspectives to DEI. So what I'm going to do is just request them to just talk about their DEI journey. Please remember that design will naturally come. And what I want you through the day to look for is the design element that is unarticulated. Yeah? As Satyaki was sharing, you could see so many design elements there, but he didn't see it as design. Yeah? So when you're watching out for the panelists, don't expect them to use the word design, but it's in the manner in which they are thinking about it, the manner in which they are articulating those assumptions, that's where design lies. Okay? On that note, let's begin with you and your experience at EY in terms of what you've done with DEI.
So I'm sure a lot of people are looking at me and thinking, okay, what is an auditor doing on a panel talking about DEI, right? So yes, my day job is as an auditor in EY, but my real passion actually is on people initiatives. I lead the talent initiatives for about 14,000 people in my team. I'm also part of the DEI Council, right, in GDS, and I lead a lot of those initiatives. And this is where when we think about the impact that we want to create, we felt at EY that you really needed to focus on having the right leadership group. So we created a DEI Council, which has dedicated members who work throughout the year on DEI initiatives. We also have people from the business. So every BU has a representative on the council to really drive that agenda in each of our respective teams. But it's a journey, right? If I look at what is EY, we're a services organization. So for us, our biggest asset and differentiator is our people. So we need to make sure that we're hiring the right people, right? We're giving them the right environment opportunities because we want them to stay with us for a long-term career. And we looked at DEI specifically around things like PWD. We said we don't want this to be a CSR. When we give careers to people, right, who are different, it's not that we're doing it as a charity. We wanted to do this so we're giving them long-term careers, helping them really grow. And that's why we said, okay, let's focus on specific aspects. And our journey really started with gender. I think that is usually where all organizations will start, right? How do we get gender equity, gender parity? And it came down to pay parity. It came down to what are we doing to make sure women also move up the ranks to senior manager and director and partner level. So gender was where we started out, but we started looking at other aspects as that stabilized. We looked at multi-generation because now the largest workforce is Gen Y, the millennials, right? And we have Gen Z that's coming in. So they have very different aspirations, very different ways of looking at things. So how do we work with them? How do we educate people who are either baby boomers or Gen X to think about including them in some of the policy makings, in the decisions, right? We then moved on to PWDs, and I think starting point again was more people with mobility challenges. I think that's a little more easier when it comes to inculcating them into the organization. But even beyond that, what about people with sight, hearing disabilities, and also neurodiversity? So the way we looked at onboarding them, incorporating them into a career path was very different. We had to change the way we actually did the hiring, right? Because typically, how will you hire a person? You'll go through a HR round, go technical round, and then, okay, they'd get hired. But people with sight, hearing, as well as neurodiverse people, it's not the same, right? So we had to change the way we hired people. We had to first educate and train our recruiters, because they need to understand what is disability. Then we said, we're going to add one more process in that. They first understand each person's disability, right? If they're autistic, what spectrum of autism are they on? That will then help us to see where can we fit people. If there are people who have sight disability, right? There are certain roles which we can fit. So he said, first, let's understand the disability, the person, and then we'll see which role we want to fit them in, and then we'll get into the technical round. So that was a complete change. We had to work with different NGOs, Vishesh, Vinaya, to really educate our people. Also, in terms of counselors, in terms of managers, how do they work with people with disabilities? Because the training requirements are different, right? The counseling requirements are different. How do you sensitize them? So I think that was a whole journey for us, and we're still learning, right? I think the last aspect will be in terms of social equity, and that's something which is a little more newer. Each one is different, right? And we look at social equity, it's more from people with different backgrounds, right? Either, if I look at India, for example, it's more about caste, creed, north, south. If you look outside, it could be on race, on color. I mean, I feel it. When people look at me, and every time I leave, since BAL came up, so every time I leave the airport, the first question that I get when they look at my passport, they say, okay, name is Chung THAM. Okay, doesn't sound Indian. Born in Bangalore. And the first question I get is, Kannada Barutta. So then I have to, and I have to actually brush up my Kannada every time I leave, because I know the immigration officer is going to ask me, and I'm saying, how do sir? Aswalpa gottu. And so, I mean, these are social equity differences that we are seeing. How do we have those talent guardrails to make sure people are not marginalized, right? So I think that's been what we look at. But how do we also make sure that it spreads? When we look at diversity, inclusion, it spreads across the entire organization. It's just not just at the leadership level, right? So at the leadership level, we said we have to have an education, socialization, and goals. So each leader is actually given a goal to say, okay, what are you going to focus on from a DEI perspective? Look at gender, look at how many PWDs you're hiring, right? How do you educate and help them? How do you have somebody from the DEI council also work with them, right? So we did that. The other is how do you bring a bottoms-up approach, right? Because it's fine to have leaders. The buy-in is absolutely necessary because they drive that message. But from a bottoms-up approach, how do you make people right from the staff or intern level all the way up to your managers, senior managers, really touch and feel this whole aspect of DEI? It was interesting, we talked about Mitti Cafe. So Mitti Cafe is also something that we brought in. It's been a great addition to our cafeteria because one is people are getting to see and interact with people with disabilities, right? And there's certain things we had to do. We had to guarantee Mitti Cafe that we will give them a certain revenue so that they don't undergo loss in the initial few months. We encourage our people also, if there's a team event, order from Mitti Cafe. Right? So I think that's something we started. We have an allies network for people to join, support, and learn more about LGBT. We have a Purple Champions network for people with disabilities, right? They can join, and also people who have family members, friends, or even colleagues who are from the PWD community. How do they also get to learn more? So I think a lot is about stories. It's about people that we interact with either at home, friends, or at the organization, right? Which could belong to any of these diverse groups. And how do they actually get to learn more so that they're more empathetic, they understand how they can help them.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Chung, for that comprehensive coverage. Because remember that when you are a large multinational company and you've got to roll out these policies consistently across the world, you have to do two things. One is standardization in some way across the world, but also the localization piece. And I'm just going to kind of move from there very quickly to come to Prajakta to get her to talk about Flipkart experiences. Yeah, over to you.
Thank you. So it's great to be here and a lot of similarities, Chung. So let me build on, what our journey has been at Flipkart. So I joined Flipkart about 5 years ago. And one of the responsibilities I had was actually be the I&D leader for the company as well. And I think at that time, our journey was just beginning. It was nascent. We were about a year, a little less than a year in that journey. So the opportunity was massive in terms of how do we shape this? How do we shape this for us as a company? Now, for those of you who may not know, our purpose as Flipkart is to empower every Indian's dream by delivering value through innovation in commerce and technology, right? That's our purpose. It's about empowering every Indian. And when we talk about empowering every Indian, it means that what we are as a society needs to be reflected in our employee base as well. Otherwise, we won't be able to solve, right? We are a B2C company. So that was where we began our journey. From there, we kind of took a little bit of an academic exercise where we said, okay, where are we from an evolution perspective? Where do we want to be? And what will it take for us to get there? So we started with Deloitte's maturity model for I&D. We pegged ourselves. We said, oh boy, we are still between 1 and 2 levels. And we really want to get to 4, which is inclusive culture. How do we chart our career? How do we chart our entire journey there? And if I break it down, there are 3 elements to it. I think number 1 was, I think, Chung, to what you said, starts from the top, has to start from the top. And our CEO has been a huge sponsor for us, and it is also integrated into the board agenda. So when it starts from your board, it becomes very easy to then kind of take it down, right? That's number 1, where you have massive leadership sponsorship. The second for us was, as we grow over the next 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, what do we start with? So we said, let's start with gender, and then gradually get into other elements of diversity, right? So we started with gender. As we started with gender, we looked at moments that matter for an employee in an employee's life cycle. What matters? It's the experience you give the person when they are interviewing with you. It is when they join you, how do you help them assimilate? It is about how do you help them develop within the organization to feel like they have an equal opportunity like anybody else. And then finally, how do you make sure that as they grow, you have a support system or an ecosystem that helps them as well? And that's what we followed. So if I think about gender or women to begin with, which is where our journey began, we said, okay, from a assimilation perspective, how do we make sure they've got the right buddies, mentors, a system that helps them settle in? From a development perspective, while there are multiple points of view on whether to do anything differently for different cohorts, I think one of the things I had heard in a similar forum, which stayed with me for years, and which I use to help people understand is also, if you think about our gardens, you have different types of plants. Every plant requires a different way of care for them to grow and nourish. But at the end of the day, it all looks green, it looks beautiful, it gives you a lot of whatever it is that you desire, right, from your garden. But they each require a different care. And that's the way to look at your employees as well. So we developed different development programs for our women talent, whether it is mentoring circles, whether it is catalyze at a middle level, a prerna at an experienced level, right? So those were some of the things that we did to build it out. We then got into veterans, we then got into LGBTQI, we got into PWD, right? So I think gradually as we got more comfortable, our organization got more comfortable, we kind of went down that journey. The two other ecosystem enablers that I can talk about, within the first year of our journey, we included inclusion as part of our Flipkart values. Because we realized that if people coming in don't experience a culture that welcomes them, you will not be able to retain who you're hiring either, right? So the first start in our ecosystem was adding inclusion as our culture value. The second was all our policies are neutral, right? It doesn't define relationships. It's partner. So when anyone comes in, I think it's equitable in terms of how they experience our benefits and policies, right? So those were some of the things that we did. Apart from that, I think the piece that you also talked about, which is sensitization. I think, so for Flipkart, we are, our corporate office is here in Bangalore, which is where majority of our employees sit. But our supply chain is dispersed across India, across tier 2, tier 3. We are within villages of India, right? And how people grow up, just because they enter through a Flipkart door, doesn't change how you think, right? So it does require a lot of effort in terms of how you sensitize, how you make sure people know what is right and what is not. How do you create recognition platforms, right? To talk about, hey, this is what we value as a company. So I think those were the other ecosystem enablers that we focused on, if that helps.
Yes, absolutely helps. And I'm just going to, see, sometimes what happens, there's just so much depth and richness to the kind of experience that you've shared that I've often found that when I'm a participant, right, it's just so difficult to make sense of it all together, right? So I'm just going to leave some questions based on what they have said, and then I'll also kind of pull it together because they've said so much between the both of them, just in case we don't want anybody to lose one. Does sector matter when you're looking at designing for inclusion? Yeah? Does it matter that you're a B2B company or that you're a B2C company or that you're a services company? Does it matter? Of course it matters. Does the business model matter? Does the ownership matter? Does scale and size matter? And I think I kind of liked, when you said so many of the things that you're doing, we also seem to be doing. But at that scale, would you end up doing it whichever company you are, right? So some thoughts as you're kind of thinking about inclusion by design is, does context matter? Yes, it does. Okay. So I think that's the first piece that I want to kind of pull more as an insight for me, and I'm just sharing it with you. But the second one, which I think was just brilliant in what they said, and I'm just being mindful of the time, so I'm pulling it all together a little bit so that we can move ahead in the next conversation, is the fact that they mentioned some very interesting things. When we are doing inclusion by design, there is governance. Diversity Council, board, and what top management commitment. How do you design for governance? Yeah? So that, I think, is a very important piece, because without that, the rest of it is just a set of activities. The second piece that I really liked in both their presentations is designing processes. And I think Chung spent a little bit of time on looking at what happened when we had to bring in persons with disability. Yeah? So you just get to see, right, the whole idea of designing processes, designing systems, designing policies, designing networks, designing collaboration, designing for development. And that was so wonderful when Prajakta spoke about how they looked at women, and particularly middle levels, senior levels, how should we be designing? And she spoke about catalyzing at one level. What does it mean? So look at the thought and the mindfulness and the deliberation with which they set up these policies, practices, and systems. But I think the biggest piece that I want to kind of leave you with, because for them it is embodied in their DNA, okay? And for many of us, they spoke about how do you sensitize managers? How does Mitti Cafe person being on campus ensure that people get in a very natural surrounding to get to see them? Yeah? There is no substitute for allies, for mentors, for individual behaviors. So just kind of tying in, I think one of the things we ought to take away from this wonderful conversation is that when you're looking for design, you're looking at the hardware and you're looking at the software. Hardware is really policies, systems, governance, dashboards, all of that. But I think it's really the software, inclusion as a value, respect as a value, dignity as a value. What are you actually saying? That's really the software, the culture, the values, the behaviors that we expect of individuals, yeah? So it appears that when we're looking at design, we need to kind of look at both these aspects coming together, yeah? On that note, let me just move to another question, and feel free, Chung, because if there is anything that I may have missed out and based on this you want to allude, feel free. But one of the things that really kind of struck me when we were having this conversation was, what does it mean for an organization like yours when you're looking at inclusion by design, especially in the context of virtual workplaces? Yeah?
So EY is a global organization, right? Chess and my team have team members spread over 6 different locations within India and 4 different countries across the world. Right? So I would say one of the silver linings of the pandemic, if I were to put a silver lining to it, is people got used to working in a virtual environment. I think that helped, because we had a lot of resistance earlier. If I had a person, say in UK working with a person in India, they said, oh, the person is sitting far away and I'm not comfortable doing that. But they had to do it, right, during the pandemic. So whether a person is sitting 5 miles away or 5,000 miles away, they didn't see that, or they got used to that difference. So I think that really helped. And I'd say technology is something which really paved the way for us. Even before the pandemic, we were actually working 3 days a week from office and 2 days from home. And things like Zoom and Skype and Teams really helped us on that journey. What also changed, especially when it comes to DI hiring, was that was the year we said, let's focus, and we put a target. We wanted to hire 100 people with disabilities. Everything was virtual, right? So even when the interviews happened, it was virtual. And this is so interesting. One of the staff who we hired started out as a consultant. When we hired the person, since it was virtual, we had no idea the person had a disability. Right? She actually has spinal muscular atrophy, which doesn't allow her to sit for long periods. And we didn't know that. In fact, she worked with us for about 6 months. She said, great, you've done really well. We want to get you on board full time. Only then she told us that, okay, I have this disability and I will not be able to work from an office for extended periods because I have to go through physiotherapy and all these other challenges. And we said, okay, we need to change the way we looked at it from a policy perspective, because we were bringing people back. And we said we wanted people to have the experience, but say if a person is able to deliver, right, and there's a need because of a medical condition or a diversity requirement, let's change a policy to allow 100% work from home. And we did that. Right? When we looked at technology, I think that has helped us significantly in terms of other disabilities as well. So people who have a visual disability, right? There's a software called JAWS. I'm sure a lot of people are aware of that. So JAWS will actually read out anything that's on your screen, right? Whether it is a PDF file, a Word, Excel. And I went to Win Vinaya as a foundation to understand how they train people. I was so surprised, right? The rate, the speed at which we listen, people with vision disability, they listen about 10 times that speed. So this software reads out, and I couldn't understand a single thing. It had to bring it down from a speed of 10 to a speed of 2 for me to actually understand. But it opens out your eyes to how virtual working can happen through the use of technology, right? Things like closed captioning, I think it's not used enough, but when we have people with different disabilities, and it could be autism as well, they may take a little more time. So when we do sessions, town halls, right, there is closed captioning. We also started recording a lot of our trainings and sessions because we realized that people, maybe they required additional support. They needed to watch a recording to see, did they miss out something? They have a little more longer or a steeper learning curve. So I think all of that has really helped us to relook at the way we deliver trainings. Say, do we need to have trainers, once a training is done, especially for PWD people, to give them additional support, right? Maybe take some other, an add-on class to see if they need some additional learnings as well. So I'd say the virtual environment has kind of changed the way we look at things in terms of remove some of the stigmas, because we're saying that when we interview people, we don't want a bias to come in, right? And similarly, when we're working with people, because like I said, we're in a virtual environment supporting 150 different offices, I think now it gives those opportunities for people, irrespective of where they are, right? Whether they're in a small little village in Kerala or in West Bengal, where they can actually, through technology, through the policies we've created, have those careers to interact and work with people across the globe.
Oh, so wonderful. What a nice example. You know, now you begin to see, right? Design is not just in the creation, it's in the ability to be able to iterate. You suddenly discover that your policy is not enabling, but there is already a person there who's working with you, who you want to retain. What do I need to change? I now need to change the hardware. Yeah? So suddenly you discover saying that my hardware is in place, we are getting the people, but we suddenly realize that it's just needed a little bit of software, additional support. So it's in this hardware-software combination between structural and cultural that design actually kind of sprouts in some way. Yeah? Let's just go over to someone here who's going to actually talk about what does inclusion mean in an e-commerce company like yours, where you have such a large gig workforce.
Yeah, it's not easy.
Yeah.
So I think for us, the largest workforce that works with us is our entire frontline associates, right? And this is whether they are in delivery, whether they are in our fulfillment centers, sort centers, anywhere between 1 to 2.5 lakh of them kind of engage with us through the year, depending on the time of year, whether it is a sale or BAU. And for us, I think as we were designing for them, I think it was very, very deliberate in how we went after it to some extent. I think there were a lot of learnings. And I do feel that we have a long journey ahead of us as well. I think one of the things that I very quickly realized as I got into supply chain was, just like we have an EVP, an employee value proposition, why should an employee work with us? What is it that the organization can deliver? We created something called as AVP, Associate Value Proposition. So why should our associates work with us? What will they get if they work with us? And we had 4 distinct pillars in them, right? We said, we want to make sure they feel respected. We want to make sure they feel cared. We want to make sure that we are working with the best in the vendor ecosystem. And we want to make sure they get an opportunity to grow with us as well, right? So that, I think, was something that for us was very, very close to our heart, saying, if this is the workforce that truly makes us who we are, how do we also make sure that we give them the best experience possible? So for that, I think one is, I think going back to some of the things in terms of how we approached it for our full-time employees. Similarly, from a policy perspective, I think we cover all of our employees, whether it is health insurance, whether it is accident insurance, whether it is life insurance. So that is covered for by us, right? Second is we have a program called Suraksha. So we have a tie-up with Practo. And they get massive discounts, whether it is on doctors, whether it is on medicines, whether it is on surgeries, right? So we are tying up with them for that as well. The third thing that we tried to do and we realized was we were very manual in how we were working with them in terms of how their attendance is done. And attendance is very closely calculated, is very closely tied to their salaries that they get, right? And when we work with a massive vendor ecosystem, how do they know why their salary is calculated a certain way? It's so important, right, for them at that level. So we introduced last year a tool called eSampark, and that is entirely digitized, right? So within their mobile phones, they can see what their attendance is, whether they have missed any punch in, punch out, so that they can do that. They also see their salary slips, right? And this year we are kind of extending it. So from the time they are onboarded, their background verification, to exit, and everything in between is going to get digitized in the next 6 months. So that, for me, that is also inclusion, right? Because it's making sure that you're taking care, and irrespective of who you are, you're giving that freedom to the employee, right? To that individual, including putting a leave-in in the system, right? So that's the other element in terms of ecosystem. Apart from that, we also focused a lot. So anywhere between 1,500 to 3,500 PWDs work with us. So we make sure, and mostly with hearing or speech disabilities. So we make sure visually in our fulfillment sort centers, we know exactly who they are, because in cases of emergency, we know that they will not hear the PA system. We have visual, kind of lights across facilities, so that if there is an emergency, they know as well, right? We have something called Aramb. Aramb is where people who work with our PWD need to get trained in sign language, so that they can communicate. Otherwise, they feel very isolated as they work as a community. So I think a lot of those things were things that we brought in. And what I've seen, including, I think, Haryana, we were the first e-commerce company to get approval from the government to have a night shift for women. So it does mean that we have to go the extra mile in transport and so on. But I think the business benefit is significant. Because what we see is, our women workforce are extremely dedicated. Our availability is much better when it is women. The kind of dedication we see from them when they work is extremely strong. So it helps us from a business perspective as well, and it enables, because many of them are sometimes primary earners in families. Many of our PWDs are primary earners in their families. And it just, I think, to what we heard in the morning, I think if the woman in the family is independent, is independently earning, it makes a huge difference to how that family sees life, right? Experiences life. And I think for us, that's a big, big moment of pride as well. So even for our Wishmasters or our delivery folks, we kind of have a lot of recognitions that we do, whether it is the best male Wishmaster, best woman Wishmaster, and so on. So I think it's about making sure that from the time they come in, like even veterans. So we have a lot of veterans within our ecosystem as well. And we have a program called Bridge, because I think when we initially started hiring, we realized the transition from a services background into a corporate background is not easy. You need a little bit of hand-holding for them to kind of transition in. And so we created programs like those, like Bridge, where it helps them transition in. And now that we have enough within our ecosystem, we kind of pair them up with a buddy as well, right, who also helps them understand. So there are multiple things like that. I mean, I can go on and on, but I think the foremost thing for us is it's a journey, is what we've realized. I don't think it's a destination where I can say we've arrived.
Absolutely.
There is so much more for us to do there.
Couldn't agree more, couldn't agree more. And I think a couple of things that I'm particularly so delighted to listen to is this whole piece that you're doing on medical for the frontline. Because research over and over in India is showing that at the frontline workers, right, if there is a serious hospitalization, it's two paychecks away to poverty. Yeah, two paycheck, that's all. Okay, so given that, I think it's so crucial in terms of this whole medical, what we can offer them. I think that's an important piece when we are looking at inclusion, right? We often don't kind of look at these last minute, last mile issues. The other one that really stayed with me is the whole idea of transparency. And I think as we get into more and more gig workers, contractual workers of different kinds and everything, transparency becomes so important, because we are never going to be able to make them permanent workers.
Yeah.
And the question then we have to ask is, how fair and how equitable are we to those groups of people that we actually work with, and what better way than harnessing technology in different ways to be able to make that same impact. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And I'm going to keep 10 minutes for the audience, okay? So before I kind of close, Chung, I'm going to start with you. a personal message to these practitioners in the room, based on your experience, not E&Y, but based on your experience, what are the 3 things or 2 things that you would like to leave for them? And you have a couple of minutes till he finishes. I know, that was a surprise. Yeah.
I think a challenge for a lot of people is how do they start on this journey? And it's not something you can give them as a goal. Because if you do that, then they're going to do it as a tick in the box and say, okay, this is given to me, I have to spend so much time, I'll just do it for the sake of doing it. It's about how do you enable people, first socialize, help people understand the different aspects of it, have smaller things, like I said, we have a Purple Champions Network, we have an Allies Network. So encouraging people to just join that, say, listen to some of the stories as a starting point. Even for me personally, actually, I got into this because when I grew up, I had family members who were part of the LGBT community, and I had no idea about that. We're talking about more than 20 odd years back, right? And at that point, I think India wasn't even aware for something called LGBT. So I think that got me curious. And I volunteered for one program. And from that one program, it led to the other, and that's how my journey started. So just helping people get exposed to the different aspects of DEI and I as a starting point, and then encouraging them on their journey. I think sharing those narratives. So if their stories, I had one of my seniors who came out, so the transgender, and changed, had the gender reassignment surgery when she was actually in the organization. And then when he came out, we made sure that we did that, right, to a larger group. We gave them some background about it. And I think what was really surprising was we were very apprehensive. We've never done something like that. And when he finished his story, there was actually a huge round of applause. People came up to him. And he didn't feel that, he was left out in the open. He felt a lot of support. So anything you can do to spread those kind of stories will be helpful.
Thank you. Thank you.
So actually, it reminded me of a discussion I had with my daughter when she was 8. We were celebrating Pride Month and in Flipkart, and she'd also heard about it in school, and she came back and asked me, what is it? So at an 8-year-old, I tried my level best to explain. I think simply I said that it is, people can love whoever they want, right? So she said, yeah, so what's wrong with that? I said, there isn't. We're just celebrating that. So for me, I think just starting conversations early in your personal lives, with your friends, with your family, with your kids, I think for us is going to help us position us better for the future. I think that's one. Second, for me, DEI is not a nice to do. It really isn't. It is a must do. It is mainstream. And I think for many organizations, that's the shift we have to make together. Right? And the third thing is what I said, which is it's not a destination, it's a journey, because I think sometimes it can be frustrating. Sometimes, you feel like you're slipping back, but we have to stay at it. I think it's something that gives us, at least gives me, a lot of joy and fulfillment that we are doing the right thing. And this is what we have to make sure we do. And for anything that we try and change, you will always have resistance. I think it's about how do you enable people to understand different points of view and still take it forward.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. And let me open for questions. Please, observations, comments, and everything you can do later. Specific questions addressed to the panel. You have 2 questions. Wonderful. Please. Yeah.
Like me to read it out?
Yes.
Sure. So the first question is from Aniruddha, is specifically for Chung. So based on your experience with hedge funds, PE, finance, how does a high-growth startup or organization maintain an all-inclusive nature without compromising on business, as work-life balance tends to be an issue there, skewing the gender ratio down towards specifically in favor of men? So are there any best practices or case studies that you could share?
I think there are a few questions in that.
Yes.
Yeah, I think certain industries are more skewed. I'll agree to that. If we look at, let's say, women in technology, I think that's been a huge focus area for us, how to get more women into technology. But the funny thing about accounting and finance is actually the ratios are more in favor of women. For example, if I look at accounting, so in the Philippines, my gender ratio of accountants in my team is about 70-30. In China, it's about 80-20. 20. In India, it's somewhere around close to 60-40. Right? So there are a lot of women who are entering into accounting and finance because historically, women stay away from the sciences. And we're trying to change that. The other thing, when it comes to whether it's a hedge fund or private equity, the timings, right? Because you're always on call. It's a high pressure job. And I'm not saying women aren't there, but I think the challenge is, do women stay on? And I think that's something we're seeing across all the consulting firms is, as women hit that manager and senior manager level, right, it becomes more and more challenging because they have families, they have domestic pressures. So how do we encourage them to stay on? And I think flexibility is extremely important, giving them that kind of support, right? We've given, like working mothers, right? We give them a lot of flexibility in terms of time they can start. Some of them say, I only want to work 50% of the year. Yes, they'll take a pay cut, but then they have that flexibility because we want to retain them into the workforce, right? So I'd say the kind of support that is given, and I think it's misconstrued by a lot of men when we have programs for women. So we have a program called Create EY, and this is to encourage women at that senior manager level to get to partner and director. And men will always say, oh, we are being discriminated against, right? But that's not the fact. The fact is, if you look at the ratios of women in the boardroom at that partner director level, it's about 70-30, right? And when you look at the needle changing, the change is maybe 3-4% a year. And if we want to get to at least a 50-50, at the current rate, it may take us about 15 years. So I think the thing is not about giving women preferential treatment. It's about giving women the right opportunities, mentorship, guidance, counseling, right? So that they can also prove that they also belong at the boardroom level. So break that glass ceiling.
Thank you, thank you. I think the whole concept of equity instead of equality, right? We have one more question from Harish from Publicis Sapient. What are the ways in which you are empowering the underrepresented community in your organizations? Apart from women-specific trainings, are you also focusing on PWD or queer community? This is for the entire panel. Yeah.
We are. So I think I spoke about the journey that we had, and we have tie-ups with NGOs, and we actively kind of have LGBTQI within our ecosystem, within our workforce. Similarly for PWD, similarly for veterans, women, right? And I think the piece is, to your earlier question, by the way, people also think supply chain can't have women. It's very difficult to hire, right? In the last 2 years, we've increased our representation of just women by 64%, right? And if I look at what the industry is at, we are probably 4 times what the industry is at, right? So I think the reason I'm saying this is because sometimes you have to challenge the assumptions people have, and there are enough opportunities for us to push the agenda as well. And there's one thing which is probably not directly related, but which I think is important for all of us to also realize is, I was listening to a chief economist of Axis Bank just a couple of months ago. And I think what he said was, as a country, our dividend of youth is going to be with us for the next 30 years. And for us to reap that benefit and become wealthier as a nation, we need equal women representation in the workforce, right? And if we don't do that, we would have had a lost opportunity. So for me, I think one is, of course, questioning and pushing that, but also realizing the context within which we are, the country that we are, and what is required for us to progress as a country.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. So when we look at it from a global lens, right?
I see more questions coming in, so maybe you can take 30 seconds.
Sure,
Yes.
sure. So I would say the acceptance of LGBTQ plus is quite different in each country. So if I look at our Philippines office, for example, a lot more people who are open have come out, are happy to share their stories, ask, saying that, hey, for the social events, can I cross-dress? As against India, where even though it's decriminalized, there's still a lot of stigma, there's still a lot of hesitation. So understand the social, the laws specific to different countries, or even different regions in India. We know the cities may be a lot more open. On the PWD front, I think it's a journey. Work with NGOs, because we are very specific about setting targets. Because unless you set a target, right, then it becomes challenging. Do you hire 5 people or 10 people? Are you getting the right buy-in? So initially we were against setting targets of hiring PWDs, but we challenged that and we said, okay, and after we set the target, right, we found a lot more clarity, a lot more buy-in in terms of onboarding these people.
Thank you.
You can pick on any of them, whichever appeals to you out of these.
We won't be taking any more questions apart from that for this session because of the lack of time. Okay, one last.
No more questions.
No more? Okay. No more questions.
You should allow me to
Go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, so my suggestion would be that we take these three.
I think one was around caste-based inequality is invisible, and how do you do that, right? From designing inclusive policies. I think for us in our policies, it's just completely neutral, as I said. So there is absolutely no differentiation based on which language you speak, state you're from, gender you belong to, education you've had, nothing of the sort, right? I think the second thing is, before we began on the IND journey, and we call it IND in Flipkart because we think inclusion before diversity, we also looked at representation of religion, states, generational, because we have that data, right? So you can easily kind of look at that. And we looked at whether that is representative of India as a country. And because we thought we did have, from a religion perspective, generational was a little more skewed towards millennials and Gen Zs because we are an e-commerce organization. But we did have all the other generations also represented as an example. Similarly, states, because we hire from across India as well, we realized that that was not necessarily our focus, and hence we focused on gender to begin with, then veterans, PWD, LGBTQI. So, yeah. So,
Thank you.
Hopefully that answers.
Go.
Okay, the question is on reverse mentoring. So I think this has been a challenge for us as well. But what we've started doing is two things. One is, how do we assign somebody from the PWD community or LGBT community to one of our leaders, right, to help them understand. So we said each of our leaders sign up for this reverse mentoring program. We will assign somebody, either PWD or LGBT, to you to help you understand the challenges they face, right? It's a smaller project, but I think early stages, right? So we're waiting to see what the results are. There's something in terms of sign language interpreters. I would say in large forums, we do that. So our global town halls, because again, when we have our CEO address the 400,000 people, yes, we do have a sign language. Challenging to do in smaller teams, but yes, if you have PWD people who are part of your team, and if you want them to also volunteer to do sign language, that's great. And the last is women who are joining after a gap. I think the key thing is when you interview them, it's how you give them that comfort that you will support them. They may need a little longer runway when they join the organization because they're coming back after 4 and 5 years. So making sure that they feel comfortable, they will get the support, and also talking to their counselors, whoever the managers are once they join, to say this is the person who needs some more help, and giving them that that confidence that they will have a little longer runway compared to others.
Yeah. Thank you very much, and indeed such a pleasure. I mean, I don't know how many events I've been on 5 inclusion now I have been ever since they started. But I just find, I love the idea that you were talking about as a journey, because after 20 years, right, you sometimes just sit back and say, okay. And today there was just so much I took away from the both of you. Thank you so much. And to the audience, all that I think I want to pick is what Chung said. Boss, don't wait for anybody to start. Starts with you. And at that level, you can make a difference to whoever else it is, whether it's a PWD, whether it is a gender, whether it is LGBTQ. The second one, I think, just reiterating, saying that there are clearly the structural hardware of the organization that's essential. But imagine having this wonderful hardware, but not good enough software. Or having this great software, but cannot run on the hardware. Okay? So in some ways, I think it's important as each one of you go through this journey to look at whether our policy systems and processes complement the vision, culture, and behaviors that we need, because it is in that design actually happens. Thank you so much, and over to you.
Thank you to our panelists for that inspiring session. Let's have another round of applause. And we also have specific DEI related listening booths in the Vijayanagar hall. So please feel free to check them out as well. Thank you.